We begin with breaking news tonight on these explosive blackmail allegations against Trump ally David Pecker by Jeff Bezos, the Amazon founder who, of course, owns the Washington Post. Now, one of the Daily Beast editors who has been all over this story as a Friday night scoop and is here with me momentarily. The context of all of this, though, I want to go through. As you probably know, if you're watching the news, there are serious implications in all of this for Donald Trump, because today, Bloomberg News reports the allegations against Trump ally David Pecker could blow up his immunity deal. Another source telling NBC the same thing. Prosecutors probing whether the publisher of the National Enquirer violated his own non-prosecution agreement by trying to blackmail Bezos this week. Pecker's side is insisting they acted lawfully. And Pecker has one big problem here because Bezos is basically accusing him of a crime. But this news about the risk to his immunity deal shows a second problem, because as Bloomberg and NBC and as Rachel earlier tonight have all been discussing and reporting, Pecker may have played himself here and blown up his own immunity in the investigation into how Michael Cohen and Donald Trump hid bad stories for Trump during 2016. Translation: if David Pecker told the feds about other crimes he committed during those immunity talks, he could now be on the hook for them. So there could be a lot more pressure on this Trump ally. Now, Bezos published emails that he says reveal how Pecker threatened to publish stolen and explicit photos of Bezos unless he publicly backed down, making claims that Bezos says are false. First, they wanted Bezos to say the tabloid's coverage was not politically motivated. Why did they care? We'll get into that. And second, they wanted Bezos to end his investigation into how the Enquirer folks obtained his private messages. And they seem scared of Bezos' theory that now the whole world can read and discuss, that certain powerful people who experience Washington Post news coverage will wrongly conclude I'm their enemy. President Trump is one of those people, obviously, by his many tweets, Bezos wrote. Now, Trump did seize on that National Enquirer story about Bezos' divorce, writing, quote, "So sorry to hear the news about Jeff Bezos," given here a nickname, "being taken down by a competitor whose reporting I understand is far more accurate than the reporting in his lobbyist newspaper, the Amazon Washington Post. Hopefully the paper will soon be placed in better and more responsible hands." So that is a lot. And there's plenty one could say about it, but today the White House laying low.
Is the president aware of the Bezos situation? What's the White House reaction?
I'm not sure if he's aware of it, and we're not going to get into a conversation about something between Jeff Bezos and a tabloid magazine.
But Bezos already drew attention to an intriguing aspect of this whole story: Saudi Arabia. Bezos, quoting the New York Times from August, reporting that after Trump became president, he rewarded Mr. Pecker's loyalty with a White House dinner to which the media executive brought a guest with important ties to the royals in Saudi Arabia. At the time, Pecker was pursuing business there while also hunting for financing for acquisitions. Bezos noting the Washington Post coverage as well of the murder of a person who wrote for them, Jamal Khashoggi. Of course, many remember this. This was in the Saudi consulate in Turkey. Now, Saudi Arabia is a huge critic of the Post's investigation. But now, for some reason, so apparently is this American tabloid owner, David Pecker. And this, again, to what Jeff Bezos is asking, is a big question. Because he writes, several days ago, an AMI leader advised us that Pecker is apoplectic about our investigation. For reasons still to be better understood, the Saudi angle seems to hit a particularly sensitive nerve. So that obviously is a lot, and a lot of it looks bad even if it's not all true. In other words, even if not every one of those things leads to the worst possible inference about the people involved, namely Mr. Pecker, Mr. Trump, and anyone doing their bidding. Now, let that all sink in and then look at a brand new report from the Daily Beast tonight, which details the larger patterns here, the inner workings of this tabloid company's tactics, private investigators who've literally directly worked for them, and the, quote, war of blackmail that goes on, and helps explain their business model and perhaps their brazenness that they thought they could get away with this against the richest man in the world. Joining me now, as promised, is the editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, Noah Shachtman, who can give us a lot more details about this reporting, how it came to you, why some of these people are speaking now. I'm also joined by Jonathan Alter, a columnist for the Daily Beast and MSNBC analyst, as well as Nick Kristof, a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times, and both have been in Saudi Arabia. I have not, and don't know that I'm going anytime soon, although I wouldn't prejudge a whole region.
You'd like it, Ari.
Yeah? Good. Well,
might not feel totally comfortable, but you'd find it very interesting.
How about I might like part of it? I'm sure there's lovely people there. I'm not sure that I would like the way the government plays ball, certainly the way they kill journalists.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, walk us through new reporting tonight. Yeah. Most people who heard this story, even if you don't get in all the details, say, wow, who thinks they're going to get away with trying to thuggishly take out and intimidate the richest man in the world?
Yeah.
These cats. Why?
Why? Because they've been doing it for decades. We talked to two private investigators today. They're both colorful characters, I might add. One is a former porn star turned private investigator. The other guy just got out of the joint for a gambling operation.
I got to warn you, our viewers can handle it. It's late Friday night. But Nicholas Kristof is a Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times journalist who cut his teeth doing humanitarian investigations.
Yes.
Let's keep it at his level of respectability. I don't want Nick to regret the booking.
Yes. These two were most recently in Darfur helping the refugees and the poor there. And they came back to describe what they did for the National Enquirer, which is this same kind of intimidation tactic over and over and over again. Everybody we talked to in conjunction with the National Enquirer today, every veteran, and we didn't just talk to those guys, we talked to others, used the term blackmail. They used it over and over again. And the reason they
this is, I'm going to slow you down but give you the mic back, that this is a criminal business model.
I'm not going to use the term.
Your sources are describing basically getting material and making money through repeat crime, blackmail, extortion, allegedly.
Allegedly. And not only that, but sometimes they would work with the very lawyers of the targets of this. In other words, you would get some celebrity, their own lawyers would have dirt on them, serve it up to these private investigators who would serve it up to the National Enquirer, and then they would do a kind of blackmail or some kind of trade deal.
Yeah.
And then, now, it's not just what they did to celebrities, it's also their attitude towards adversarial journalists, which they've done over and over and over again. They keep on threatening in various ways the reporters that look into their operations. So we have a guy on our staff, actually a former Enquirer veteran who joined the Daily Beast less than a year ago. They tried to hit him with a $5 million lawsuit while we were reporting our story on them.
And how did you all handle that?
We kept reporting and told them to walk.
How often does this stuff work?
I don't know how often it works in other shops. I mean, I can just say with our shop, it doesn't work. But I bet there are shops in which it does work. Look, as we all know, journalism is a tricky trade. The business model is really tough right now. And I can imagine that, for some shops being threatened with millions of dollars in legal fees or, millions of dollars in damages, that could be a big deal for them. And that might dissuade them from a story.
You look at the multiple theories here, and one is that Donald Trump is behind this because he acts like he's behind this, right? And I want to read for you what Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe, who is a big Trump critic, to be clear, said in describing that. Are Donald Trump and the murderous Saudi prince co-conspirators with Pecker in a failed criminal plot to blackmail and extort Bezos, as the owner of the Washington Post, asking for a friend in the Southern District of New York? That is one unproven, but one theory of what this all is about.
It's unproven. I don't have any evidence for it, but it has the ring of plausibility to it, which is an extraordinary thing to say about a president of the United States. Now, Noah has just been describing a very seamy form of transactional journalism, which has been going on in the gutter of American journalism for a very long time. What's different is that this has not directly involved the president. We know that he was involved in what they call catch and kill at the National Enquirer, and that it benefited him in the Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal case. So we know that he's in this world. We know that he's very close to the Saudis. We know that even today, the Trump administration is breaking the law, the Global Magnitsky Act, that requires them to take action in response to the Khashoggi killing, and they have not done so. Today was the deadline. They missed it. They're in violation of the law. That's how tight they are with the Saudis. That's how much they want to sugarcoat this brutal crime that took place. So we have a troika now. Pecker, MBS from Saudi Arabia, President Trump. They are all in alignment They all have a motive to have committed this blackmail.
Can you explain why David Pecker, after getting caught up in this federal probe and getting immunity, would go back to what looks like such great risk to himself?
I can't, except, to Noah's point, this is the way they play. And they actually thought they could intimidate the richest man in the world. And they had, strong interest in trying to do the president's bidding. The president just tweeted that he thinks that this disgusting publication would be preferable as the owner of the Washington Post. Is better. He said it's a better newspaper than the Washington Post. This is the way despots all around the world are playing now. They are buying up the biggest newspaper in their country to silence it and quell criticism. And that's what Trump would like to do in the United States and taking us away from democracy. He's not going to get away with it because he's met his match in Jeff Bezos.
Well, it is chilling because you all have a lot of experience working for media institutions. Without naming names, there are institutions that have been more or less courageous over the years, right? Depending on who's in charge and what the calls are. And this is an individual, whatever one thinks of anything else about Bezos, who got hit with something that really took a personal kind of embarrassment or risk and stood up to it, and other people might not. Alter here, if I can call you by your last name, like sure. Sort of mix between, I don't know. Alter is outlining the Trump theory that Lawrence Tribe talks about. There's another theory that wouldn't be as bad for Trump, but would still go to a very important international intrigue, which is simply that MBS and the Saudis are doing this through the Inquirer to go after American journalism that matters around the world. I mean, do facts matter? Do stories matter? You bet they do in the case of Khashoggi. Brennan, to continue the last names, from the CIA, is of that theory. And he says, I have no doubt, given the Washington Post's relentless and appropriate condemnation of MBS for the killing of Khashoggi, that he would try to discredit, embarrass, and hurt Bezos financially if he could. That's the theory, that it comes strictly from them.
So I'm a little more skeptical of that because I think that Saudi Arabia is indeed aghast at what the Washington Post has been writing. In my conversations with the Saudis, they haven't tied that so directly to Jeff Bezos. They've tied it very much to the Washington Post leadership directly. But I would just emphasize that I think we have to be really careful about speculating here. Essentially, we have a bunch of dots, and we should just be careful about connecting them. And what we know is that, indeed, as Noah said, that we have sort of this blackmail model on the part of the National Enquirer. We know, as John said, that the National Enquirer has previously leveraged the material it has for the political benefit of the President of the United States. And we also know that Saudi Arabia has indeed had very close ties with the President, MBS with Jared Kushner, that the National Enquirer has had very close ties and has wanted to have business ties with Saudi Arabia.
There are several dots, but there's also a line. And the line is that these emails have come out, and the Enquirer is not saying that they are fake or false. And these emails outline goals that go beyond the Enquirer's obvious desire to simply enrich itself or make money. They seem to be a goal that they wanted to cut off Bezos, the Post, finding out where they got the stuff. And if they had just got it from a private eye, that wouldn't necessarily be so bad.
Well, I mean, Jeff Bezos clearly seems to think that there is a Saudi connection, but we don't have further evidence of that. So I just think we should be careful about a rush to judgment on whether this goes beyond the National Enquirer. There are reasons for suspicions, for a lot of questions. I think we should be careful about answering them.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we got to note is that Bezos's mistress has a brother named Mark Sanchez. He is associated with many Trump world figures, Carter Page and Roger Stone, to name two. And he's also had something of a relationship with AMI over the years, the Enquirer's parent company over the years. And so he's somebody that's been interviewed in this sort of private investigation that Bezos has funded. So it may be all of these political forces, or it may come down to something much more personal, or some combination thereof.
I agree that we don't have any evidence, as I said at the outset, that would lead us to firm conclusions. But there are other data points, and one of them is a 100-page publication called The New Kingdom. It was put out by AMI, the owner of the National Enquirer, that just slobbered all over MBS in a way that, was reporting that I guess they did some of the same kind of reporting on Donald Trump during the campaign, but it was very un-National Enquirer-ish. There were no ads. It wasn't at all clear who paid for this. Pecker said that he paid for it out of his own pocket for reasons that are a little bit unclear. The State Department, interestingly, last year when this came out, was asked whether there was a connection between the United States government and the publication by AMI of this 100-page magazine about how great Saudi Arabia is. And they sort of issued a non-denial denial, I think the quote was, to our knowledge, there's no connection to the U.S. State Department, which raised some real eyebrows. So there's a lot of reporting yet to be done on the connections between the Saudis, David Pecker, and the Trump administration.
When you look back at Iran-Contra, one of the things that struck people was that it seemed like such a stupid idea from the start. And this stuff just seems so wacky. If it were a movie, right? And at this scene in the movie, right after the midterm elections, the president's tabloid, killer who hides bad stories is back in the mix with international intrigue, you'd say it's too much.
Well, but the whole catch and release idea of the National Enquirer paying for these stories from women to not publish them for the benefit of the president was pretty wild. And so this is kind of one more layer of wildness on top of that. But I would just make the point that, look, we don't know exactly whether there was some terrible malpractice or conspiracy here. Vis-a-vis this affair. We do know that there was vast malpractice vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia more broadly, and that the CIA has concluded that the Crown Prince murdered a Washington Post columnist, that the president has refused to hold the Crown Prince accountable, that Jared Kushner seems to have inquired about whether the U.S. could help the Crown Prince take over the succession, that meanwhile the Crown Prince is torturing and imprisoning women's rights activists, and that the U.S. government refuses to even mention their names. So these are things that are indisputable.
Right.
And I think we have to, above all, hold the American government accountable for that failure to act on the murder of a journalist and on the imprisonment and torture.
Well, I think
just this week, one more thing is that the Crown Prince was quoted as saying that he, quote, wanted to put a bullet
in him. Yeah. Well, look,
so their efforts to distance themselves from that heinous crime are not going very well.
This is an important point to reflect on, because you're talking about the true stakes, and you're talking about state-sponsored murder, and you're talking about free speech around the world, and that's why you bring Nicholas Kristof to the table. And look, you talked about some of the pornographic sources that you have, and that's why you're here. I'm kidding. Sometimes I tell jokes, and then people at home, I'm kidding. I know all three of these individuals, and they're very talented journalists, and that was a joke. Your story was great.
Thank you.
My special thanks to Noah Shachtman, Nick Kristof, and Jonathan Alter, going deep on a story that I think we're going to keep hearing about.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.